The Titan's claw missed her throat by the width of a knuckle. Sarah Webb didn't fall back. She stepped into him, the way her father taught her to step into a charging bull on a planet where bulls weighed 4 tons and gravity didn't forgive mistakes. Officer Craig Thullian's forearms were already committed, already carving the air where she used to be. Her splintered left arm hung dead at her side. Her right hand found the gap behind his lower shoulder weld and did not hesitate. Somewhere behind her, 300 colonists held their breath. The blade went into the hilt before anyone in the basalt ring understood what they were watching. That image, her shoulder buried in a 2.5-meter alien's joint socket, her face utterly calm, was the one Admiral Zara Veltha would replay for the rest of her career. Not the blood, the calm. 11 days earlier, none of this had a name yet. Veltha's secondary cardiac valves rattled before her conscious mind caught up to why. That was the tell. 26 years commanding the cruiser Stellar Harmony, and her own body still announced danger faster than her instruments did. She was 3 systems out from Sector 7 when the signal hit. A code black distress burst from a colony she'd never had reason to flag. New Terra, Kepler 442, population 11,000, agricultural, unremarkable. The burst carried one line of clear text underneath the encryption. 1 child, confirmed fatality, enforcement officer refuses extraction. Run it again, Veltha said. Her sensor tech, a Zelthari named Pip with antennae that hadn't stopped trembling since the signal landed, ran it again. Same line, same colony, same impossible 4 words sitting where a routine border dispute should have been. Captain Thullian's transponder is still broadcasting from the surface, Pip said. He's logged it as a lawful suppression action, says he's invoking council immunity and requesting immediate diplomatic extraction. Veltha's claws found the arm of her chair. He filed paperwork before he requested a medical team. There's no medical team request, ma'am. The bridge went quiet in the particular way it did when nobody wanted to be the one who said the obvious thing out loud. Veltha said it for them. Then there's nobody left who needs one. She did not raise her voice when she gave the order. She never did. Maximum burn, get us to Kepler 442. The stellar harmony came about, and somewhere in the recalculated trajectory, a navigation marker blinked from green to red, 17 hours to the colony at a velocity that would strain the dampener seals. Veltha authorized it anyway. I wish I could tell you it ended at the colony gates. It didn't. Stay close. The 17 hours gave her crew time to pull the file on Thullian, and what came back was worse than a single bad officer having a bad day. Her tactical officer, a Dramori-adjacent insectoid named Blex, clicked his mandibles in a pattern Veltha had learned meant he was holding something back. Say it, she told him. 17, Blex said. 17 matching incidents across this quadrant in the last standard year. Same unit designation. Same pattern. A Dramori enforcement officer responds to a minor civilian infraction with force calibrated for a combatant twice human mass. 17 colonies. 17 reports filed as lawful suppression. None escalated past local review. He paused. The logs weren't keeping order, Captain. They were running a stress test on us. On how much our people would absorb before someone hit back. Veltha didn't answer right away. Below decks, in a holding cell built for detainees twice her size, a third sensor feed showed a different kind of stillness. A human woman sat with her spine straight against the wall, left forearm locked in a medical splint, right hand wrapped around a heavy iron wrench like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. She hadn't spoken since she'd been brought aboard. She hadn't cried either. Her eyes had the flat, banked look of a furnace door shut on a fire still burning behind it. Who is she? Veltha asked. Sarah Webb, came the reply, colony engineer, irrigation systems mostly, civilian, no military record. A pause. Her daughter was the fatality, Captain, 8 years old. Veltha's throat valves rattled again, longer this time. The wrench in Sarah's hand was scratched along one edge from years of torquing bolts on basalt-anchored pipe joints, the kind of tool that had outlived 3 handles and would probably outlive her. She turned it over once, slow, like she was checking it for damage before a job. Nobody on the bridge crew understood yet that she was. 3 hours from the colony, Blex flagged something new on the long-range scopes, a tight cluster of encrypted transmissions leaving Sector 7 on a heading that didn't match any registered shipping lane. Multiple frequencies, Captain, moving fast. Whoever's sending them doesn't want company. Track it, Veltha said, quietly. When the stellar harmony finally dropped out of slip transit above Kepler 442, the first thing Veltha saw on the long-range feed wasn't the colony. It was the wreck. The Iron Fang, a Dramori heavy cruiser 3 times the stellar harmony's mass, hung dead in orbit. Its hull split along the dorsal seam like something had torn it open from the inside and walked away. No distress beacon, no survivors transmitting, just cold metal venting the last of its atmosphere into vacuum and a reactor core reading so far past stable that Veltha's instruments refused to render it as a number, only as a flashing red field that said, simply, catastrophic. She had expected an angry colony. She had not expected a graveyard. Pip, she said, and her voice came out quieter than she meant it to, get me eyes on the surface, now. The surface feed resolved into something Veltha had no framework for. New Terra Colony wasn't burning. It wasn't rioting. It was standing in formation, civilians in work coveralls and harvest gear, rifles and irrigation tools slung across their backs in neat rows along the perimeter fence, watching the sky with the patient stillness of people who had already decided what was going to happen next and were simply waiting for the universe to catch up. That's not a mob, Pip said, antennae flat against her skull. That's a perimeter. Veltha took the shuttle down herself. The spaceport had one cracked landing pad and a crowd that didn't part so much as observe her, the way you'd watch weather. A heavyset man in a stained jacket stepped forward before her boots hit the tarmac, introduced himself as Jake Morrison, Colony Counsel, and didn't bother with pleasantries. You're the one who answered the burst, he said. Admiral Zara Veltha, Stellar Harmony, I need to understand what happened here. Then come understand it, Morrison said and walked. He led her through streets lined with basalt block houses built to shed the colony's brutal gravity, past a marketplace where the stones were still dark with something that hadn't quite finished drying. A few colonists watched her pass. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody needed to. The silence had a shape to it, and the shape was grief sharpened into procedure. The community center had been converted into something between a courtroom and a war room. 300 people stood packed along the walls. At the center of it, behind a cage of welded irrigation pipe, Officer Craig Thullian rattled the bars with 2 of his 4 arms, while the other 2 stayed folded in a posture Veltha recognized as wounded pride. Admiral, he said, spotting her uniform. Finally, someone with sense. I am invoking immediate council diplomatic extraction. These people have no legal authority to detain a commissioned enforcement officer. Sit down, officer, Veltha said, and something in her voice made even Thullian's mandibles still for a second. An elderly woman sat at the front of the room behind a plain table, a stylus in one hand and a tablet that looked older than the colony charter itself. She introduced herself simply as Helen Morrison. We were already in session, Admiral. You're welcome to observe. You don't get to interrupt. Veltha sat. A man named, she would learn later, Jake's brother stood and gave testimony in a voice scraped flat by exhaustion. He described a girl, 8 years old, crossing the marketplace square with a basket of grafting cuttings for her mother's irrigation lines. He described Thullian's patrol stopping her for failing to clear a restricted lane fast enough. He described the baton. He did not describe what came after. He didn't have to. The room already knew. The acoustic suppression command was issued twice, Thullian said from the cage, unbothered, almost bored. Standard protocol dictates physical correction when a subject fails to comply after 2 verbal warnings. I followed procedure to the letter. Her mass profile was misjudged. That is regrettable. It is not a crime. Veltha felt something cold settle behind her sternum. Her mass profile was misjudged. He'd killed a child and filed it as a measurement error. Helen Morrison logged the statement without looking up. Noted for the record. Then, flat, the court finds Officer Thullian's actions to constitute lawful grounds for capital sentencing under colonial charter, article protecting minors from disproportionate force. Council immunity does not apply on sovereign frontier soil. Sentence to be carried out at dawn. Thullian laughed, actually laughed, a wet clicking sound that filled the cage. You don't have the authority. The doors at the rear of the hall opened. Sarah Webb walked in. She moved like a woman crossing a field she'd walked 10,000 times, unhurried, exact, her splintered arm held tight against her ribs. The crowd parted for her without being asked. She stopped at the center of the floor, and the room's noise died entirely. I invoke the old clause, she said. Trial by combat, colony charter, founding addendum. It's never been struck from the books because nobody ever thought we'd need it. Helen Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, like she'd been waiting for exactly this. Thullian's laugh came back louder. He rose to his full height inside the cage, forearms unfolding, chitin claws catching the overhead lights. You, he said, looking at Sarah's splintered arm, her ordinary frame, want to fight me. I want to finish what your reactor maintenance crew already started, Sarah said. The room went still in a different way. Veltha's throat valves rattled, sharp and sudden, because she understood, a half-second before Thullian did exactly what Sarah Webb had just confessed to in front of 300 witnesses and a Zelthari admiral. My ship, Thullian said slowly, the Iron Fang. Took me 4 hours, Sarah said. Your dampening conduits run through the same maintenance access as the colony's old grain freighters. I've been crawling through tunnels like that since I was 9. She tilted her head. Your engineers built a beautiful ship, officer. They just never imagined someone outside your crew would know it better than they did. Veltha's mind reassembled the orbital wreck in an instant, not sabotage by a soldier, not an act of war by any force the Galactic Council tracked or feared. A grieving irrigation engineer with a wrench and a maintenance schematic had walked a 3 times larger warship to its grave, alone, with her daughter, not yet a day in the ground. It was the dread bomb moment, and it didn't arrive as an alarm or a shouted warning. It arrived as silence, the slow, sick recalibration of every assumption the Dramori had built their entire occupation doctrine on. We measured them by mass. We measured them by claws and plating and the things we could see. Veltha watched it land on Thullian's face in real time, the precise instant an apex predator realized the prey had been studying him back. That's impossible, Thullian said, but his voice had lost its certainty. You're civilian, untrained, you don't have the... I have the torque specs for every joint weld on a standard Dramori security frame, Sarah said. I had to. Half my irrigation pumps run on retrofitted military surplus. I know exactly where you bend. Nobody in the room moved. Sundown, Helen Morrison said into the silence. Basalt Ring, Northfield, trial by combat, witnessed by colony charter. Officer Thullian, do you accept the terms, or do you accept the original sentence? Thullian's claws flexed once against the cage bars. Pride answered before fear could. I accept, he said, and when I'm finished, Admiral, you'll log this colony for the supremacist uprising it actually is. Veltha said nothing. She was already running the numbers in her head, and none of them came out in his favor. The walk from the community center to the North Field took 11 minutes, and Veltha counted every one of them. Word had outrun official notice the way it always does on a colony small enough that everyone is somebody's cousin. By the time the procession reached the basalt ring, what had been 300 witnesses in the courtroom had swollen to something closer to 2,000, packed shoulder to shoulder along a retaining wall built originally for grain silos, repurposed in an afternoon into stadium seating for an execution that had quietly become something else. Veltha walked near the front of the crowd, flanked by Jake Morrison, who hadn't said a word since the courtroom. She broke the silence first. You knew she'd do this, Veltha said. The trial by combat clause, you knew before she walked in. I knew Sarah, Jake said. Knew her before. There's a version of grief that goes quiet and stays that way. There's another version that goes quiet and starts taking a ship apart bolt by bolt. He glanced sideways at her. She's always been the second kind. We just didn't have a use for it until now. Pip's voice crackled into Veltha's earpiece, low and urgent. Captain, you need to see this. Send it. The feed resolved on her wrist display. A Dramori command relay, intercepted off the same encrypted frequency Blex had flagged hours earlier, finally decoded. Thullian's unit had filed a transmission before his capture, and it wasn't a request for extraction. It was a formal escalation call, the kind that triggered automatic mobilization protocols across an entire security sector. How many ships? Veltha asked. We're reading a full punitive flotilla spinning up out of the Dramori forward base, Pip said. ETA to this system is 14 hours if they push hard. A pause, her voice dropping. Captain, this isn't a rescue mission anymore. Their command channel is calling it a counterinsurgency response. They think this colony started a war. Veltha's throat valves rattled, low and continuous now, a sound she didn't bother suppressing. 14 hours. One field, one trial, and an entire sector's worth of warships already burning toward them because one officer's pride had been worth more to his command than a child's life had been to him. She didn't tell Sarah. There wasn't time, and there wasn't a version of that conversation that would have changed anything about to happen in the ring. The crowd parted as they reached the field's edge, and Veltha saw the basalt circle properly for the first time, a flat ring of dark stone scoured smooth by decades of colony foot traffic, ringed by torches that hadn't been lit yet, waiting for true dark. Two guards walked Thullian out from a holding pen at the field's far side, his restraints removed at the boundary line per the old clause's terms. He rolled his shoulders, all four arms loosening in sequence, joints popping audibly even from 30 meters away. He's enjoying this, Veltha murmured. He thinks he's already won, Jake said. Watch his crest plate, achievement badges. He collects kills like trophies, Admiral. Officially he calls it commendations. Across the field, Sarah Webb knelt at the ring's edge and checked her boot. It was such a small, ordinary motion that for a moment Veltha almost looked past it. Sarah tightened the lacing, adjusted the angle of her splintered arm against her ribs, rolled her neck once the way Veltha imagined a farmer might before lifting something heavy. No speech to the crowd, no final words. She picked a stray pebble off the basalt with her good hand and tossed it absently aside, clearing a workspace before a job she'd already finished a dozen times in her head. That was when Veltha noticed the wrench. It sat near the wall where Sarah had been sitting, scratched along one edge, handle dark with old grease. Veltha had seen it back on the Stellar Harmony in the holding cell and assumed it was a comfort object, something for a grieving woman's hands to hold on to. She understood now it had never been comfort. It was a tool Sarah trusted more than any weapon the colony could have handed her, kept close the way a soldier keeps a sidearm, not for sentiment, for reach. She's not going to use the wrench, Veltha said quietly. No, Jake agreed. She's going to use everything it taught her. Helen Morrison climbed a low platform at the field's edge, tablet in hand, and the crowd's noise dropped by half just from her presence. The terms of the old clause are simple, she said, her voice carrying flat across the basalt. Combat to yield or to finality, no outside interference, no weapons beyond what each combatant carries onto the field. Her eyes found Thullian. Officer, you have heard the charges. Do you still accept these terms? I accepted them an hour ago, Thullian said, bored, rolling a clawed hand in a gesture of dismissal. Must we repeat the formality every time, or can we proceed to the part where I demonstrate exactly how poorly your colony understood the math of this confrontation? A ripple of low, angry murmuring moved through the crowd. Helen didn't flinch. Begin, she said. Thullian didn't wait for a second invitation. He came across the basalt at a dead run, four arms spreading wide, claws catching the last orange light of the dropping sun, and the sound of 2,000 people inhaling at once rolled across the field like a single held breath. Sarah Webb didn't run. She rose from her crouch and stood her ground exactly the way she had in the courtroom doorway, the way Veltha now understood she'd been standing her whole life on a world that crushed anything that didn't learn to hold steady against its weight. You built a dominion out of legal precedents, she said, not shouting, her voice somehow still reaching every row of the silent crowd. I came from an ecosystem that doesn't hold committees. Thullion closed the last 15 meters in under 2 seconds. Veltha's claws dug into the low wall at the field's edge. Behind her, Pip's voice was still murmuring updates about flotilla timetables and sector mobilization codes, numbers stacking on numbers, an entire empire's worth of military machinery grinding toward this one small field. And none of it mattered in the half-second it took for a four-armed titan to close the distance on a woman with a splintered arm and nothing visible in either hand. The crowd's breath caught and held. Thullion's claws swept low, aimed at her center mass, the kind of strike built to end a fight before it started. Sarah wasn't where the strike landed. She'd shifted her weight a heartbeat before his arms committed, a lateral adjustment of maybe 3 inches, the kind of correction that meant nothing on a world with standard gravity and everything on a world that had spent her whole life teaching her exactly how much force it took to move a body and exactly how little margin she had to waste. Thullion's claws raked empty air where her ribs had been a half-second earlier. His own momentum carried him a full stride past her. That was when Veltha saw it, Sarah's right hand already at her boot, already closing around something small and dark and waiting, the motion so economical it barely registered as movement at all. Not a blade meant for show. A standard agricultural utility knife, the kind every irrigation engineer on the colony carried for stripping insulation and cutting feed line, honed to a working edge and nothing more. Captain, Pip's voice cracked through the earpiece, sharper now, cutting straight through the mobilization figures. New signal, different source, it's not Dramori command. Veltha didn't look away from the ring. Identify it. It's not asking permission to enter the system, Pip said. It's already here. Above the field, where the first stars were starting to show through the colony's thin upper atmosphere, something vast and dark slid silently across the gap between 2 rising moons. Too large, too quiet, and gone again behind cloud before Veltha's eyes could fully resolve its shape. In the ring, Thullion was already turning, recovering his balance, his confidence not yet cracked. He had no idea his momentum was already spent. He had no idea what was standing 3 inches inside the reach he'd spent his entire career counting on. Sarah's hand was already moving. The blade found the gap behind Thullion's lower shoulder weld before he finished turning. Dark, dense fluid sprayed across the basalt. Thullion's momentum carried him 2 staggering steps into nothing, his balance suddenly, catastrophically uncoupled from a body that had never once failed him before tonight. He spun back toward her, claws raised, and for the first time since the courtroom his confidence cracked open into something closer to confusion. "That's not possible," he said. "You keep saying that," Sarah said. "It keeps happening anyway." She didn't retreat, she didn't circle. She stepped in again, the same economical half-stride that had carried her past his first charge, and this time her hand found the soft articulation behind his nearest knee joint. The blade went in clean. Thullion's leg buckled under him, and he caught himself on 2 remaining arms, dragging his ruined leg across the stone in a wet arc. He swung wide with his good arm in pure animal reflex, no longer fighting with strategy, only with the last of his mass. Sarah let the strike pass a hand's width from her shoulder, close enough that the displaced air pulled at her hair and didn't flinch. She had measured that gap before he threw the swing. She'd been measuring gaps like it her entire working life, irrigation lines, structural tolerances, the precise distance between a falling beam and a person standing under it. "Hold him," someone in the crowd shouted, though nobody moved to help. Nobody needed to. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a repair already underway. Sarah's blade found the second knee. Thullion went down fully this time, both legs folded wrong beneath him, his crest plate scraping stone as he tried and failed to push himself upright. The crowd's silence finally broke into something low and rolling, not cheering exactly, but the sound of 2,000 people watching a myth fail in real time, syllable by syllable, joint by joint. Above the field, the dark shape Veltha had glimpsed earlier resolved fully out of the cloud cover. It wasn't one ship. It was a formation, human hulls, lean and gray and unmistakably military, dropping out of high orbit in a slow, deliberate column with their running lights dimmed to almost nothing. Veltha's earpiece filled with Pip's voice, no longer reporting Dramori movements but human ones, an Earth Defense Force contingent that had apparently been holding position just beyond sensor range, waiting for a signal that hadn't come from any official channel. They knew, Veltha said quietly. Word travels, Jake said beside her, not looking away from the ring. Even when nobody's supposed to be listening, we've had eyes on this sector for longer than your councils ever bothered to notice. Veltha's throat valves rattled again, and this time she didn't try to read it as simple stress. It was something closer to vertigo, the slow collapse of every assumption her people had built an entire occupation doctrine on. They had measured humans by mass, by claws they didn't have, by armor they'd never worn. Nobody had thought to measure the quiet ones. Nobody had thought to ask what an engineer learns from a lifetime of holding broken systems together with her bare hands. In the ring, Thullion dragged himself half upright on his one working arm, dark fluid pooling beneath him on the stone. He looked smaller now, the achievement crest on his plate dulled with grime, and when he finally spoke his voice had lost every trace of the courtroom's certainty. I yield, he said, formal yield under the old clause's own terms. You have to honor it. That's the law. Sarah Webb stood over him, the utility knife loose in her hand, her splintered arm still locked against her ribs. For a moment, nothing in the field moved. Veltha found herself holding her breath, watching the woman's face for some sign of what she'd decide, and finding only the same flat, working calm she'd carried since the holding cell. I built irrigation systems my whole life, Sarah said, quiet enough that only the front rows caught it clean, the rest passed hand to hand in murmurs that rippled outward through the crowd like water finding cracks. You learn something doing that work. A pipe doesn't get to half fix a leak. You finish the repair, or the whole system fails downstream. You don't get to declare yourself done because it's inconvenient to keep going. The law says. Your law, Sarah said, not mine. Mine says you don't get to bruise a child and call it a measurement error. She knelt, unhurried, and finished it. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was small and final, the particular sound of something coming fully apart, and then the field went silent in a way it hadn't been silent all night. No breathing held, no murmuring, just the dripping of fluid onto stone and the slow, distant hum of orbital engines descending through the upper atmosphere. Sarah Webb stood. She did not raise her hands. She did not look at the crowd for approval. She crossed the ring at the same unhurried pace she'd entered it, and when she reached the low wall where Veltha stood, she stopped. Here, she said, and set something heavy and dark down at the Admiral's feet. The achievement crest, torn free, still slick. Take this back to your council spire. Veltha looked down at it, then at Sarah's face, and found nothing there to read. No triumph, no relief, just the same exhausted stillness of someone who had cleared an obstruction from a line and was already thinking about the next repair. Behind her, Helen Morrison was already moving through the crowd, directing two colonists toward the medical tent, her voice clipped and practical, already organizing the after bandages, water, someone to walk Sarah's splintered arm over for a proper look before the adrenaline wore off and the pain caught up with her. Nobody in the crowd cheered. Nobody chanted a name. They simply began the slow work of clearing the field, the way people clear a field after any job, finished or not. Sarah reached down and picked up the iron wrench from where it had rested against the wall since before the fight began. She turned it once in her good hand, checking the worn edge the way she always had, and laid it down beside the crest on the stone. Tell them our patience has officially unraveled, she said. Then she walked toward the medical tent at the field's edge, without looking back once, her boots leaving dark prints across pale basalt that hadn't been pale in hours. Veltha stood over the two objects, the torn crest and the scarred iron tool lying side by side on bloodied stone, one an Empire's symbol and the other a colony engineer's whole life's work, and understood with sudden, total clarity that the galaxy's measurements had all been wrong from the start. They had counted claws and mass and armor plating. They had never once thought to measure what a person could carry after everything else had already been taken from them. Above the field, the formation of human warships finished its descent and held position in low orbit, engines burning steady, weapons arrays unlit, but visibly armed, waiting for an order that hadn't been given yet and didn't seem to be in any hurry to come. Pip's voice came through the earpiece one last time, careful now, almost gentle. "Captain, the Dramori flotilla just altered course. Toward us." "Away," Pip said. "For now. Command's recalling them for reassessment. Nobody up there knows what they're supposed to do with a colony that just won a war they didn't know they were fighting." Veltha didn't answer right away. Out past the basalt ring, past the medical tent-lit windows, the colonists were already filing back toward their homes in small, quiet groups, rifles still slung, work still waiting for dawn. Nothing here looked like a celebration. It looked like people returning to a job that wasn't finished, only interrupted. She picked up the crest. She left the wrench where it lay, against the wall, because some things weren't hers to carry and some debts weren't hers to collect. The sky over New Terra Colony stayed full of waiting ships until well past midnight, lights dimmed, engines idling, a silence that had nothing settled left inside it.